Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello and welcome into another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Today is Monday, September 28th, and this is episode number 309 of the Baseball Podcast. I appreciate everybody listening in. Hopefully you enjoyed an excellent weekend of baseball out there. The final weekend of the regular season has finally come and gone. We now know at this point who will be making the postseason. We know the matchups, and we're going to be talking about all of that stuff in today's episode. It's a great episode for you here. In the first segment, we'll talk about who made it in the National League, keep you guys up to date on everything that's going on, kind of dive into some teams maybe who just missed, look at some next steps for them. Then we'll do the same in the American League for segment 2, and then on the back end of today's show in segments 3 and 4, we'll get into the playoff matchups and make some predictions on ultimately who I think will be advancing through Wild Card Weekend. And there are a couple of different intriguing matchups in the first round, but we'll get to all that. We'll get there. For now, I want to talk to you guys about what happened this weekend and pretty much where everybody finished in the National League. And starting out at the top, there's no surprise. Of course, the Los Angeles Dodgers, they were known to be the 1 seed pretty much for a couple of weeks now, so they weren't really playing for much down the stretch. But having said that, they still won their last 4 games of the regular season and advanced to the playoffs at 43-17. So a fantastic year out there for LA. And looking at some of their individual performances this year, they were led offensively by Corey Seager, who hit .307 with 15 home runs, 41 RBIs. Mookie Betts hitting .292, 16 bombs, 39 RBIs. Justin Turner hitting .307, only 4 home runs, so not as much power for Justin Turner. Will Smith behind the dish, he was fantastic for them in 37 games, hitting .289 with 8 home runs. A.J. Pollock in the outfield, 16 home runs, 34 RBIs, tied with Betts for the team lead there. And then you continue to scroll all the way down, and Cody Bellinger hit .239 this year with 12 home runs and 30 RBIs. So Cody had a bit of a down year. Max Muncy only hit .192. Jock Peterson only hitting .190. Gavin Lux struggled in his rookie season, hitting .175. So this lineup is so deep that they have the ability for Cody Bellinger and Max Muncy to hit in the low 200s and still finish a year 43-17. It just goes to show you, what this lineup is all about from the top down. And then from the pitching staff side of things, Julio Urias in 10 starts, 55 innings, 3.27 ERA. Clayton Kershaw in 10 starts, 2.16 ERA. He was fantastic once again in the regular season. Dustin May, 2.57 ERA in 10 starts. Walker Buehler, 3.44 in 8 starts. Then you got the likes of Ross Stripling. He had Ross Stripling, he was 5.61. It was Tony Gonsolin who had the 2.31 ERA in 8 starts. So you'll certainly see a rotation of the likes of Kershaw, May, Buehler for the first round of the postseason. Depending on which days and the matchups there, will depend on who throws in which game. But ultimately, the Dodgers are certainly the team to beat in the National League, at least on paper. The 2 seed in the National League behind them, That is the Atlanta Braves. The Braves finished 35-25. They did lose 3 of 4 down the stretch in the regular season, but not much to play for, so you can't get truly upset with their finish. And offensively, they were led by the likes of Freddie Freeman, potential National League MVP. I know we like to touch on that a bit during Thursday's episodes when I talk to you guys during the week, and we'll get into that this week when I give you guys my ballots if the results are not in by then and have been made public. If they are, then we'll react to those. But either way, we'll have a similar conversation like we normally do during the week. But Freddie Freeman, he hit .341, 13 home runs, 53 RBIs. Then you got Marcell Ozuna, who got himself paid this year. He bet on himself with a 1-year contract and with the DH in the National League and the ability for Ozuna to play left field from time to time. He hit .338 with 18 home runs and 56 RBIs. That is a fantastic line for a 60-game season, and certainly looks to get him 15 to 20 a year. I wouldn't be opposed to maybe an A.J. Pollock type of contract, 4 and 60 for Ozuna, which is something that last year was not offered to him during the offseason. Travis d'Arnaud hitting .321 in 44 games behind the dish. He's been excellent. Dansby Swanson, .274 in 60 games. And then you go down to Ronald Acuna, hitting .250 in 48 games with 14 home runs and 29 RBIs. So Adam Duvall had 16 home runs for him down the list here, but the concern for the Atlanta Braves is the pitching side of things. It has been the entire year. They've dealt with health issues in the rotation. Max Fried in 11 starts has been fantastic with a 2.25 ERA. He is certainly the ace that they were looking for this year, finishing 7-0. But then you get down to Kyle Wright in 8 starts, 5.21 ERA. Josh Tomlin, 5 starts, 4.76. The only other gentleman was the rookie Ian Anderson, who in 6 starts after being called up has a 1.95. So you're looking at a rotation of Fried, Anderson, and possibly Cole Hamels, since he's made only 1 start, went 3 innings. Maybe not. I don't know who you're running out there in Game 3. Probably a combination of the bullpen. But once again, we'll look at that later in segment number 3 here. The 3rd seed in the National League, that is your Chicago Cubs, 34-26. They are the NL Central champions, and they finished 1 game behind the Braves in that 2-3 battle. Coming down the stretch, Braves lost 3 of 4 as the Cubs won 2 of 3, but ultimately were not able to catch them to get that 2 seed. And offensively, the Cubbies, they didn't hit all year. This is the problem for the Cubs. They have a team average of .220, which I believe is the lowest out of any playoff team. I'd be very surprised to see if it was anybody else without really diving in and doing the research. But Jason Hayward leading the way, .265. Ian Happ, .258. Wilson Contreras, .243. But the rest of the guys, Rizzo, .222. Bryant, .206. Baez, .203. Schwarber, .188. It's just, this Cubs offense is going to frustrate the fans here as they head to the postseason, and the rotation's going to have to carry him. The top 3 and then 4th starter, but the top 3, John Lester, he struggled a bit this regular season with a 5.16 ERA, but Hendricks and Darvish were both excellent in 12 starts. Hendricks had a 2.88 ERA, and Darvish ERA right at 2.01, and that's going to have to be the formula for the Cubs for postseason success moving forward. The 4 seed and the second place finisher, what comes from the NL West, and that is, of course, the San Diego Padres. They finished with the 2nd best record in the National League, but find themselves in the 4th spot. They finished 37-23, including winning the final 3 games of the regular season, and ultimately eliminating the San Francisco Giants. Spoiler alert, as we continue down the list here. But the Padres were led by Manny Machado, who hit .304, 16 home runs, 47 RBIs. Will Myers hit .288 with 15 home runs and 40 RBIs. And Fernando Tatis Jr., as hot as he started, his struggles in September brought his average all the way down to .277 with 17 home runs and 45 RBIs. But fantastic offensive years from Tatis, Cronenworth, Myers, Machado. Eric Hosmer in 38 games hit .287. He is now back healthy and looking to add to this team offensively, but the concern comes from the pitching staff because there were late injuries to Dinelson Lamet, who had a 2.09 ERA in 12 starts, and then Clevinger, who in 4 starts had a 2.84 ERA for the Padres. And it is a bit of to be determined when it comes to the extent of their injuries and how much time they will miss, and that is something to look out for, certainly during Wild Card Weekend, and ultimately if the Padres are going to be shorthanded. So the number 5 team, the St. Louis Cardinals, they're the only team in Major League Baseball not to play the full 60 games, but based on winning percentage at 30-28, will be your 5 seed and have the pleasure of facing off against the Padres. The Cardinals won the 3 out of 5 against the Milwaukee Brewers over the final weekend to clinch the second place finish there in the NL Central. They were led by Paul Goldschmidt, who played in all 58 games, hit .304, 6 home runs, 21 RBIs. Let's see, Tommy Edman hitting .250, playing in 55 games. Colton Wong hit .265. Yadier Molina hitting .262. So this team offensively really isn't going to light you on fire, and ultimately they are in the second place position due to their pitching staff, and it starts at the top with Adam Wainwright, 3.15 ERA in 10 starts this year, but then it was by committee. I mean, this team had to use a ton of arms this year. Jack Flaherty, 4.91 ERA in 9 starts. Daniel Ponce de Leon in 8 starts had a 4.96 ERA. Dakota Hudson was very good for them, 2.77 ERA in 8 starts. Kwon Hyung Kim had a 1.62 ERA in 7 starts, and then Austin Gomber, who had a 1.86 in 4 starts. So look for Wainwright, Flaherty, and probably Kwon Young Kim to start the rotation for the postseason. But the Cardinals once again advanced to playoff baseball, and an impressive showing from them for the amount of games that they had to play and the amount of days coming down the stretch. But the 6th seed Miami Marlins, the surprise of the National League, it begins here. Honestly, the rest of the teams, you could have said, yeah, okay, they made the postseason. Well, the Marlins, they were nowhere near this picture during the beginning of the season. And at 31-29 in the 6th seed, winning 3 of their last 4, certainly an impressive showing all the way through the year. They were led offensively. Miguel Rojas hit .304 in 40 games. Garrett Cooper hit .283 in 34 games. Jesus Aguilar hitting .277. Brian Anderson led the team with 11 home runs in 59 games. An impressive showing from him, but the pitching side of things is where the pleasant surprise comes from Miami and South Beach. I mean, they have been a lot of fun to watch, for this rotation. Pablo Lopez at the top, 11 starts, 3.61. Alcantara, 3.0 ERA. Trevor Rogers, let's see, Sixto Sanchez, his ERA at 3.46 in 7 starts. So these guys are the surprise of the National League, and depending on the matchup and where we head from here, could be fun to watch in that Marlins-Cubs series, because the Cubbies don't hit, and the Marlins pitching could surprise some people. But we'll get into that much more in segment number 3, like I talked about a bit earlier. The Cincinnati Reds are the final wild card team, or the first wild card team, I should say, at number 7. They were 31-29, but are the 7 seed because the number 2 place teams finished 3 through 6, and then 2 wild card spots. The Reds at 31-29. They won 3 of 4 down the stretch. This was my surprise team in the National League. They finally showed up in the month of September. They were making me sound quite foolish there for a bit in the month of August, but truly put it together in September, had themselves a run down the stretch, and are a hot ball club coming into the postseason. And with that rotation, I'm not sure there's somebody you want to face. But offensively, Jesse Winkler in 54 games hit .255. Shogo Akuyama, .245 in 54 games. Mike Moustakas hit .230. I mean, this team hit .212. There you go. They were lower than the Cubs. Told you I'd be surprised. But Cincinnati hitting .212 as a team is somehow in the postseason, and that is undoubtedly due to their rotation. And it starts with the probable Cy Young winner in the National League, and that's Trevor Bauer, who in 11 starts had a 1.73 ERA this year, and you follow him up with Sonny Gray, Luis Castillo, and Tyler Mahle, and you find yourself going up against a solid rotation there. So that Reds-Braves series could also be a lot of fun in the first round. And the final wildcard team came down to a three-team race, came down to the final day of the regular season, the final game. Each team could make it in different ways, and in perfect 2020 fashion in the National League, all three teams lost, which meant the Milwaukee Brewers got the 8 seed over the San Francisco Giants and the Philadelphia Phillies. So the 8 seed Milwaukee Brewers, they make the playoffs at 29-31. They are under 500. We talked about, are we going to have a team under 500 make the playoffs? Here we are, the Milwaukee Brewers. I don't think they're that good at baseball, but they lost 3 of 5 down the stretch. I was going to say maybe they're getting hot. Now, they were hot over the final 2 weeks. Ultimately, the Cardinals won 3 of 5, including the final day of the regular season. But offensively, it has been a struggle. Christian Yelich hitting 205. That is such a surprise with 12 home runs, 22 RBIs. Keston Hiura hitting 212. He's an everyday second baseman. Orlando Arcia hitting 260. It's just, I don't understand how this team made it, but looking at the Phillies, knowing, their issues because I'm a Philadelphia guy, and then the Giants roster on paper, it certainly makes more sense when you look at it that way. Brandon Woodruff, he was excellent in 13 starts, a 3.05 ERA for them. Corbin Burns, 2.11 ERA in 9 starts. Those two will certainly go on Wild Card weekend. But that's your playoffs, right? Those are your teams. We'll touch on the Giants here briefly. Like I mentioned, they lost the last 3 games of the regular season to finish 29-31. They were tied with the Brewers, but based on divisional record, they did not win the tiebreaker side of things, but certainly overachieved out in San Francisco. They did not have playoff aspirations when the year started, but after Donovan Solano hit 324, Mike Yastrzemski hit 298, Brandon Belt hit 306, Alex Dickerson hit 288. They showed you offensively that they were much better than we thought they were, and truly it was their pitching that let them down. I mean, Johnny Cueto, a 5.4 ERA in 12 starts. Tyler Anderson, 4.3 ERA in 11 starts. Logan Webb, a 5.4 ERA in 11 starts. And then for the Philadelphia Phillies, who, if they would have won on the final day, would have gotten in during a 3-way tie at 29-31, ultimately fall and get swept by the Tampa Bay Rays to go 28-32. And it's basically because of this bullpen. I mean, we'll start there and ultimately work our way back down. But it truly, they just could not find anybody who wanted to get outs out of the bullpen. Just couldn't do it. Tommy Hunter, 4.01 ERA. He was one of their better ones. Hector Neris, he was good, 3.98. But Brandon Workman, 6.92. Jojo Romero, 7.84. Heath Hembry, 12.54. David Phelps, 12.91. And it didn't get any better. And if your bullpen's not very good, a general manager once told me, that means your team isn't very good. And even offensively, with some of the normal contributors having solid years, Didi Gregorius hitting 284 for them over 60 games. Alec Baum, 338 over 44 games, a fantastic rookie season. Bryce Harper up and down, hit 268, 13 home runs, 33 RBIs, but a frustrating finish if you're a Phillies fan in the National League, and certainly some jobs will be changing here in the near future. And we'll keep you up to date on all of that stuff here as we move forward at the GSMC Baseball Podcast, but that'll wrap things up for the first segment. We'll pause now for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows, and when we come back, we'll talk to you guys about the American League. Where'd everybody finish? Who are the matchups? Stick around and find out.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back, and thanks for listening to today's episode of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. This is episode number 309 of the Baseball Podcast. We're continuing now to talk about the American League and ultimately how things finished up in the standings. What are the matchups going to be before we get to all the breakdowns from both sides in segments 3 and 4 of today's episode. But before we dive into the American League, actually, do me a favor. Check out the GSMC Baseball Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, as well as the GSMC Podcast Network. That really goes a long way for helping us continue to spread the word, continue to let you guys know about the latest and what's going on out there, as well as wherever you're listening to this podcast, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, Amazon Voice, whatever it is. More and more platforms are becoming available, but leave a 5-star rating, write a review, leave a comment, reach out. I'd love to interact with you guys here on the episode and touch base, but without further ado, let's jump into it. The American League, the Tampa Bay Rays, they have finished as the number 1 seed in the American League. They have basically held that post for quite some time now. They overtook the Yankees there in the middle of the season a couple of weeks in and really never looked back. And offensively, they're led by a couple of different names. It's really a balanced lineup for the Tampa Bay Rays. Brandon Lowe, who was once an MVP conversation, finished the year hitting .269 with 14 homers, 37 RBIs. Then you have Joey Wendell hitting .286. Yandy Diaz hit .307 for him down there in Tampa Bay. I mean, this is a good ball club. The balance of this team is impressive. Ultimately, the rotation is fantastic as well. If you're looking at comparing, pure stuff, I'd put this rotation up against pretty much anybody else in baseball. You have Blake Snell, 3.24 ERA in 11 starts. Tyler Glasnow, 4.08 in 11 starts. Ryan Yarborough had a 3.56 ERA in 9 starts. Charlie Morton, 9 starts, 4.74 ERA. So this team, I mean, they didn't have anything to play for, quote unquote, in the final weekend of the regular season, and they were able to sweep a, again, quote unquote, desperate Phillies team, which was a frustrating way to end the regular season. But Tampa Bay finds themselves at 40-20, the second best record in all of baseball, behind the 43-17 Dodgers. But truly, I believe the team to beat here in the American League in the postseason. The number 2 seed, we have the Oakland Athletics. They finished the year 36-24. They split their final 4 games 2-2, led offensively by Tony Kemp, who hit .247. Matt Canha hit .246. Robbie Grossman, .241. Matt Chapman, .232. Stephen Piscotty, .226. So their offense out there in Oakland, although they performed well, finishing 36-24, really did not dominate the way some people thought at the beginning of the regular season. And their rotation has some up and downs to it, and ultimately I'd be a little surprised to see who they run out there. It's certainly going to be Chris Bassett, who had a 2.29 ERA in 11 starts, but Jesus Luzardo, the rookie, Matt Fierce, Sean Manaea, Frankie Montas, all those guys had ERAs in the mid-4s, approaching 5. So it's certainly a discussion to have if that's the direction that you want to go. So Oakland, ultimately in the postseason, I think just based on pure stuff and talent, I don't know if they should be valued as the number 2 team in the American League, or if they're a bit higher just due to how bad that the AL West was this year, where the Astros finished in second place at 29-31. So I do think the Athletics are a bit overvalued here in the 2 slot in the American League. After them is the Minnesota Twins. They finished as well at 36-24, losing the tiebreaker to the A's. But I think they're going to be excited about that when we find out who their matchup is, because they lost 2 of 3 to the Reds over the weekend, but ultimately, again, find themselves in a better matchup moving forward. Offensively, they were led by Nelson Cruz. He hit .303, 16 home runs and 33 RBIs offensively for the Twins. Jorge Polanco hit .258. Eddie Rosario hit .257. Byron Buxton hit .254. Max Kepler hit 228. So the Twins offensively maybe didn't perform at quite the level they did last year, but certainly a scary lineup that teams aren't going to want to face in the postseason. And from the pitching side of things, Jose Barrios, 4 ERA on the dot in 12 starts. They'll look for improvement from him come the postseason. Kenta Maeda was certainly their most impressive starter. 11 starts, 2.70 ERA. Then you have Rich Hill, 3.03 in 8 starts. And Michael Pineda had a 3.38 in 5 starts. So we'll see how their rotation lines up if they go with Dobnak, the rookie who had a 4 ERA in 10 starts this year. If that's ultimately the direction that they want to go, I think it depends on the matchup and the rotation that they're facing. But following them in the 4th spot is the Cleveland Indians, who finished a game behind the Minnesota Twins in the AL Central, and they finished at 35-25, ultimately jumping the Chicago White Sox, who finished with the same record. Cleveland down the stretch won 7 of 8, and the White Sox lost 7 of 8. So as little as a week ago, the percentages of this happening were extremely low. But Jose Ramirez got hot, basically won himself an MVP award from the conversation I'm hearing. He finished all the way up at 292, 17 home runs, 46 RBIs, and was fantastic in the month of September. You have Cesar Hernandez, who hit, 283 on the year in 59 games. Franmil Reyes, 275. Francisco Lindor hit 258. Carlos Santana finishes just below the Mendoza line at 199, but certainly getting on base, drawing a ton of base on balls. And then you have the American League Cy Young Award winner. You have Shane Bieber, a 1.63 ERA, but behind him you got Carlos Carrasco, 2.91, and Zach Plesac at 2.28. So this pitching staff in Cleveland and this team getting hot at the right time, and they're going to be a difficult conversation when it comes to playoff time, that's for sure. The New York Yankees, on the other hand, they continue to be a streaky baseball team. They finished the year at 33-27, which is certainly below expectations when you're coming into this year and you're talked about the favorite in the American League and potentially the favorite in all of Major League Baseball. And once again, they dealt with a ton of injuries. I mean, it's got to be frustrating to be a fan of this team and year after year just have these injuries continue to eat you alive. But losing 4 out of 5 as you head into the postseason is not something you want as a fan base or not something you want on your squad, as you're supposed to be playing your best baseball heading into a best 2 out of 3 series this weekend. But I did want to give a shout out to DJ LeMahieu. I saw an alert on my phone pop up from Major League Baseball that he is the first gentleman in the modern era, or since 1900. That's 120 years now, folks. That's a crazy amount of time. But he's the first guy to win the batting title in the American League and the National League. He won a batting title during his time with the Colorado Rockies, and I believe it was 2016. And now here in 2020, DJ LeMahieu, with an average of 364, does qualify in 50 games played and 195 at-bats and wins the batting title in the American League. So shout out to DJ. That is extremely impressive, my man, winning that in the National League and then now winning it in the American League as you led the way for the New York Yankees. But Luke Voit was the other gentleman who was awesome offensively. He hit 22 home runs this year. That's an absurd amount of home runs. I mean, times 2, 120 games, you're looking at 44. And then, times it by a half, 150, that's 55. You're looking at 55 to 60 home run pace here from Luke Voit over the course of a normal regular season. And that is a massive amount of home runs. But he was awesome. And just the average just fell off enough to get him out of that MVP race as Jose Ramirez made a charge late. But like I touched on with the injuries, I mean, you have Aaron Judge, who played in 28 games. And looking here, Giancarlo Stanton, he played in 23 games. So this team was just bitten by the injury bug and ultimately tried to push through, and they made the postseason as the 5 seed. But lining up against the Indians, I mean, this Yankees lineup against the Indians rotation is something that we are going to touch on much more in detail during segment number 4 here. But continuing down the American League, this is where things get a bit funky in 2020. continues to make an appearance, and I'm sure is frustrating a lot of you old school fans of baseball out there, or the ones who are screaming and yelling that 8 teams certainly should not make the playoffs, and even if they do, finishing second in your division should not matter, because the Houston Astros will be the 6th seed as a 29-31 record finally here. But looking at the conference itself, they would still have qualified for the playoffs as the number 8 seed if you just went 1 through 8. But now it's a matter of them being able to face the Twins compared to the Tampa Bay Rays in that 7-8 spot. And certainly the fans in Toronto and in the south side of Chicago cannot be pleased with where the Astros ended up. But Houston, like I said, 29-31. They lost 3 straight to the Texas Rangers down the stretch. Not how you want to be entering a postseason. Not playing good baseball, struggling, finishing under 500. Ultimately, things in Houston, just a tough year for the Astros. But Michael Brantley ended up hitting 346 games for them this year. He was impressive offensively. George Springer going into free agency hit 265 with 14 home runs. Carlos Correa struggled down the stretch to hit 264 this year. But the likes of Jose Altuve hitting 219, Martin Maldonado hitting 215, and Yuri Gurriel hitting 232 is not what you were looking for as a Houston fan this year. And then on the pitching side of things, of course, everybody knows about the injuries that have taken place, but Zach Greinke in 12 starts had a 4.03 ERA. Lance McCullers, 3.93 in 11 starts. Framber Valdez, 3.57. Christian Javier, 3.48. So solid rotation on the Houston side of things. They were able to stabilize. Now, it's certainly not the likes of Garrett Cole, Justin Verlander, and Zach Greinke, but they were able to stabilize, and it's just a matter of facing the depth of the lineups in the American League compared to the National League side of things, where this rotation will most certainly struggle in the playoffs against that Minnesota lineup. But the 7th spot here, this goes to the Chicago White Sox. This is kind of the fascinating part because Chicago is tied for the, 3rd best record in the American League and finds themselves in the 7th spot because, like I touched on earlier, lost 7 of their last 8 games down the stretch. I mean, a week and a half ago, this team was the number 1 seed in the American League. Now they find themselves as the 7th spot, having to face off against the Oakland Athletics, who are fantastic year after year after year. But it really wasn't because of this offense in Chicago. Yes, they had a couple of guys get cold, but Tim Anderson hit 322 in 49 games. Jose Abreu, a potential MVP candidate, hit 317, 19 home runs, 60 RBIs. He played in all 60 games, which is an impressive feat as well, averaging an RBI a night for Jose Abreu. Eloy Jimenez, 296 in 55 games. Luis Robert, he faded all the way down to 233. He got extremely cold in the month of September and ultimately lost out on the Rookie of the Year award to Kyle Lewis out there in Seattle. But Edwin Encarnacion hit a $157 this year in 45 games. Things started to slow down for him. Nomar Mazaro, 228. Yasmani Grandal, 230. And like I said, Luis Robert, 233. So that bunch of guys all getting cold at the same time is what ultimately faded their playoff chances or their World Series chances from being the 1 seed to the 7 seed. Took a huge hit. The rotation, however, I think could steal some games in the postseason. I mean, Dallas Keuchel, a 1.99 ERA in 11 starts. Giolito, 3.48 in 12 starts with a no-hitter this summer. Dylan Cease, 4.01 ERA, but he's got electric stuff. I think the White Sox, if they put it all together and play their best game of baseball, they could beat anybody in the major leagues. But if they play like they have been over the past 10 days or so, they could also be going home on the first weekend. So that'll be a fascinating conversation coming up later in today's episode. And then your final team here, the 8th spot in the American League, that goes to the Toronto Blue Jays, who they won 4 of 5 down the stretch. They come in playing pretty good baseball to the postseason, certainly ahead of pace in their rebuild. Not a lot of people picking the Blue Jays for the playoffs this year, even in the expanded postseason. But Gurriel Jr. hit .308 in 57 games for him out there in left field. He was fantastic. Teoscar Hernandez, hit .298 or .289 with 16 home runs and 34 RBIs. Grichuk, 12 bombs, 35 ribbies, hitting .273. Vlad Guerrero, 9 home runs, hitting .262. Bo Bichette in 30 games, he hit .301. Obviously dealt with an injury, but performed extremely well when he was able to be out there on the field. And then from the pitching side of things, the rotation, Ryu, 2.69 ERA, 5-2. He looks like a great signing from the offseason. Tanner Roark, not so much, 6.8 ERA, but they're hoping to get Nate Pearson back for the playoffs, maybe get that electric stuff moving once again. Tajon Walker, who they traded for, was fantastic for them. He's got a 1.37 ERA and 6 starts so far for the Blue Jays. So if you're going Ryu, Tajon Walker, maybe Robbie Ray, part of Nate Pearson, you could potentially find yourself in a mix-up there on the American League side of things. But the next tier, the Seattle Mariners, LA Angels, the Royals, Orioles. The Angels have already fired their general manager. The Phillies anticipated to do the same on their side of things. So we're going to have action here when it comes to managers, general managers, front offices over the next couple of days. We'll probably touch all of that on Thursday's episode when we have a bit more time for you guys. But that'll wrap it up for the second segment here of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll pause right now for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows, and when we come back, we're going to get into the National League playoffs, talk about the matchups, give you guys some predictions. Who's going to win in Wild Card Weekend? Stick around and find out.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back, everybody, and thanks for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. This is episode number 309 of the Baseball Podcast, and we are at the point of today's show where we are officially previewing playoff baseball. That's right. We're done talking about who made it. Now we're going to talk about the matchups, what to expect, and ultimately give you my predictions for the first round, the wild card round, best of 3 for the postseason. But before we get into that, I will ask you, if you haven't checked out the other shows within the GSMC Podcast Network, please do me a favor, check those out. If you're into football, there's football, college football, fantasy football. The NBA is about to be in the finals. If you're not into sports outside of baseball, check out the news podcast. Check out the politics, relationship, books, working out, health and fitness, anything that you could possibly be into. GSMC has a podcast for you. We certainly appreciate it if you would check out the other shows within the network. But diving in now to the National League playoffs here, we have officially gotten underway. We know the matchups. We're now trying to establish the starting pitchers, what the matchups are going to look like. I was able to get some previews across the internet here to find out ultimately who everybody thinks is going to be starting, because nothing has been official yet, but we have a bunch of matchups that we are anticipating here. And starting out at the top, we'll go 1 through 8, kind of work our way down. Number 1, the LA Dodgers, of course, going against the 8-seed Milwaukee Brewers. And this one was a bit difficult to find from Milwaukee's side in regards to ultimately who they think is going to be starting these games, because Woodruff will be going in Game 2 if he will be on normal rest, and Corbin Burns is injured, so he will not be making a start in the wild card round. They are not anticipating having him available, so the options for the first game are kind of limited for Milwaukee, and ultimately I think they're going to go with Lindblom for the starting pitcher on their side. Now, LA, they have had things wrapped up here, so they've been able to align their starting pitchers much better, and ultimately they will be going with Walker Buehler in the first game, and then Clayton Kershaw in Game 2. Game 3 has not been determined yet, but it does look like, May will get the start in Game 3 for LA. But Game 1, obviously, with Walker Buehler versus to be determined, that is advantage LA Dodgers. And then Game 2, we have playoff Clayton Kershaw. I mean, again, it is fascinating to see what happens to this guy when it comes to the postseason, because he had another fascinating regular season. He obviously did not start opening day, but in the playoffs, he has a 9-11 record, a 4.33 ERA. He's given up 24 home runs throughout the course of his career. So if you get regular season Kershaw, advantage Dodgers. But if you get postseason Kershaw, Woodruff, who has thrown well for Milwaukee all year, could obviously steal Game 2 in their favor. And then you get to Game 3, which would probably be a bullpen game for the Brewers side against Dustin May for the Dodgers. But ultimately, the lineup for the Dodgers going against the Brewers, the Brewers starting pitching has been their best unit for this season. They're third in majors in strikeouts, and let's see here, sixth in the National League in runs allowed. But again, being without Corbin Burns, who we don't think is going to be available for this entire season, certainly is advantage Dodgers. Now, we do have, Cody Bellinger versus Christian Yelich on Milwaukee's side. Couldn't think of his name off the top of my head for some reason, but it'll be fascinating to see. Milwaukee making their third straight playoffs. They are one of two teams this year to make it with an under 500 record, and that is the first time in baseball's history that a team under 500 has made it. So ultimately, I think this one, I'm going Dodgers in 2. I'm putting faith that Clayton Kershaw will bounce back, will have a solid postseason start. It wouldn't surprise me if he does not, and this goes 3, but I'm thinking the Dodgers ultimately from 1 through 9 are exponentially better than the Milwaukee Brewers. The next matchup is between the Atlanta Braves and the Cincinnati Reds. And honestly, I think this is going to be a fantastic matchup on the National League side of things, because this is a strength-on-strength matchup. I mean, the Atlanta Braves offense is absolutely loaded. They led the major leagues in runs scored. They led in slugging percentage. They led in on-base percentage. They were second in batting average. Freddie Freeman, Marcell Ozuna, Ronald Acuna Jr. I mean, all of these guys. Dansby Swanson, Adam Duvall. It's been a fantastic run for this Atlanta offense, which hasn't been the problem for them all year. It's been their starting pitching, because the Brave starters had an ERA of 5.54, which was only good for 29th in Major League Baseball. And there's not many teams beyond that, if you guys want to do the quick math there. But it'll be fascinating to see, because in Game 1, you're going to get Max Fried from Atlanta's side of things. He'll be going up against Trevor Bauer, who is the favorite for the Cy Young in the National League. Max Fried is certainly going to receive votes, could possibly finish second. So this will be a fantastic pitching matchup in Game 1 for the Braves and the Reds. And then in Game 2 for the Braves, Ian Anderson, who didn't make his Major League debut until August 26th, he's slated to start Game 2. He's 2-2 with a 1.95 ERA. He was out of the 2016 draft and ultimately hasn't been going too deep in ball games, but has certainly been effective for the Braves, so they're expecting good things from him. And then if they get to Game 3, they're going to go with Kyle Wright, who's only 24, and he is a 2017 first-round pick. So they're going to go with the kids in Games 2 and 3 outside of Max Fried in Game 1. And then conversely, on Cincinnati's side, they're ultimately running out Trevor Bauer for the first matchup. They're going to follow him with Luis Castillo. And then if there is a Game 3, they're going to go with Sonny Gray. So they're starting rotation has been fantastic, and it's their offense that hasn't been very good. So it is strength on strength for both of these teams, and then weakness on weakness, I guess you could say. The Braves staff against the Reds offense, weakness on weakness, and then the Reds rotation versus the Braves lineup, and strength on strength. And ultimately, I think this is going to be one of the better series in the first round. I think this one goes 3 games, and every game will be highly contested. I think this one may come down to some late innings theatrics from one side or the other. Could come down to one bullpen, and this is where maybe Atlanta has made another move or two to have the advantage. But I'm going to stick to my guns. And you guys know, since you are very loyal listeners of the Baseball Podcast here, and you've been listening to me since March, April, May, before baseball even came online, so to speak. And I had the Reds as my surprise team in the National League. And because of this, I'm going to stick to my guns. I'm going to take the Reds in 3 games. Ultimately, Bauer Fried in Game 1 I think will be fantastic, but I do give the advantage to Castillo over Anderson in Game 2, and then Sonny Gray over Kyle Wright in Game 3. So I think even if the Braves are able to get Game 1, this one is advantage Reds overall in the series, and another frustrating early exit for Atlanta just due to the injuries in the rotation. I know Braves fans would not be happy with a first-round exit to the Cincinnati Reds, even if the Reds are playing good baseball and things are clicking for them now in Cincinnati. And the 3-6 matchup, I think, is a bit fascinating, to be honest with you. I don't think a lot of people are going to give much time to the Miami Marlins, but the Chicago Cubs could be in a bit of trouble. And, of course, I have to reference, as everybody will over the next couple of days, this is a rematch of the 2003 NLCS, where the Cubs were up 3-1. Ultimately blew that series. You had the Bartman game, of course, followed by Game 7. This is the first time back in the playoffs for the Marlins. And again, if you listen, we've touched on the best teams in the history of each franchise. Every single time the Marlins have made the postseason, they have won the World Series. They are 2 for 2 in playoff appearances in World Series 1. Now, I don't think this is going to happen, of course, because, the rest of the National League and where the Marlins actually stand this year. But it is truly fascinating to see that this is the 3rd team in Marlins history that has made the playoffs, and the first team in 17 years. This is their first time back. That is just, I can't help but root for them a little bit. If I wasn't a Phillies fan, I would probably be putting more stock into rooting for the Marlins. Ultimately, it's extremely frustrating to see them in this situation and not the Phillies. But truly, I think the Marlins have a bit of a chance here. Now, Marte and Urena did get banged up a little bit in the season finale, so we don't know exactly what their health status will be heading into the postseason. And if they do play, how close to 100% could they be? So there are a lot of things to be determined here from Miami's side of things. And the pitching matchups are going to be better than anticipated. And the reason I think the Marlins have a shot is due to the weakness of Chicago's offense and the actual effectiveness of Miami's rotation. I mean, Sandy Alcantara is looking to go Game 1. He's got electric stuff, high 90s from the right side. Sixto Sanchez is lined up for Game 3. He's high 90s from the right side. And then they're going to sandwich those two with Pablo Lopez, who has been good, above average for Miami, but certainly doesn't have the stuff to the level of Alcantara or Sanchez. And then on Chicago's side of things, they're going to counter that with Yu Darvish, who lines up to pitch Game 1. Game 2 is to be determined, but I think Hendricks will throw Game 2 just due to, looking at the rest and ultimately how the finale of the regular season now aligns with the playoffs, and that leaves Lester to be going Game 3. So Darvish advantage in Game 1, Hendricks advantage in Game 2, and then Sixto advantage in Game 3, and that's where ultimately I'm going to go Cubbies in 3, because I just think that the experience for Chicago against the youth of Miami, Sixto Sanchez, yes, he lit the world on fire when he first came up, but actually his last couple of starts haven't been as good on that side of things. So I think advantage Cubs, even though this Marlins rotation could give them issues. I'm taking the Cubs in 3 and to advance in the NLDS moving forward. And then lastly here, we have the number 4 seed San Diego Padres. They'll be taking on the number 5 St. Louis Cardinals in the first round. And the Padres, again, are the 4 seed, even though they have the second best record in the National League. And this is their 5th playoff trip, or this will be their 6th playoff trip. They've had 5 previous appearances, the Padres, that is. And this is kind of a fascinating statistic because twice they've reached the World Series, so 2 out of 5 made it to the World Series. Well, the other 3 times they've made it to the postseason, they've been eliminated by the St. Louis Cardinals in the first round of the playoffs. So either they're going to make the World Series or they're going to get bounced by the Cardinals here in round 1. And honestly, if you want to put a futures bet on the Padres to win the World Series, I don't think that's a horrible bet because the odds in the lineup and the pitching rotation, they basically scream advantage Padres here in the first round with the amount of games that the Cardinals have had to play in a limited number of days coming back from their coronavirus outbreak and pushback, only playing 58 games, 5 games in 4 days to finish the regular season, a crazy amount of doubleheaders all throughout the month of September. So they are limping into the postseason. And conversely, the Padres taken 3 out of 4 from San Francisco in the final 3 games with really nothing to play for because they've been locked into the 4 seed now for about a week, which is fascinating. Again, a team fighting for their lives. You know, San Diego just shows that they are that good and they have that much depth within the organization that we can play our starters 4 or 5 innings, get them out of the ball game, and still win and still advance and still, play good baseball. So the rotation here from St. Louis's side is a bit of a guess from my end. Even reading the blogs and some of the beat reporters, they don't know exactly what the rotation's going to look like. But from San Diego's side of things, in Game 1, it lines up for Chris Paddock to take the ball. In Game 2, they're looking at Zach Davies. And then in Game 3, it is to be determined because during the last week of the regular season, Dinelson Lamet and Mike Clevinger both reported elbow tightness or bicep tightness. You know, nothing serious in regards to sounding the alarms. And both guys played catch this past week and reported positive progress. But if they don't have to push those 2 individuals and can give them kind of a skip on their next start here and wait till the division series to get things going, that is absolutely what they are looking to do in San Diego. Now, I do have one of those 2 guys down to start Game 3 because if they get to a Game 3, I do believe they're going to go with the guy who feels better out of those 2 in a winner-take-all situation. And on St. Louis's side, I have Ponce de Leon going Game 1 based on his off days in the rotation. That leaves Adam Wainwright for Game 2, and then to be determined for ultimately a Game 3. And for my prediction in this series, I'm going San Diego in 3 games. I do think Paddock and Davies have a bit of an advantage in the first 2 games, but ultimately it's the St. Louis Cardinals. And something just always tells me they play great baseball, they play fundamental baseball, they play exactly where they need to be. They've been to the postseason, been here, done that, and Wainwright in Game 2 is going to get a W and push this one to 3, and ultimately I have the Padres taking it in 3 games. And if my predictions are correct, and, typically they are, again, Reds, White Sox, everything like that, it has all come to fruition. That would leave us with a divisional round of Dodgers versus Padres and Cubs versus Reds. Yes, that's who it is. So it'd be an NL West matchup, Dodgers, Padres, and then NL Central, Cubbies, Reds, and ultimately what could be a fascinating second round of the playoffs. But that'll wrap it up for our National League coverage here today on the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We'll pause one last time here for a word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows, but when we come back, we'll wrap up today's episode talking about the matchups in the American League, and I'll be giving you guys my predictions and what to look for. So stick around, everybody. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll be right back.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Welcome back to the fourth and final segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Today is Monday, September 28th. We are officially into postseason baseball as we are breaking things down on what to look for here moving forward into the Wild Card Series weekend or weekday, I guess, right? Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It's going to be a fun week for everybody out there. 8 games of postseason baseball will be on television this Wednesday and possibly again on Thursday. I know the American League, they start out on Tuesday, so we'll have 4 matchups on that day, and then all 8 will be playing on Wednesday. You'll have at least 4 National League games on Thursday, and then however many American League series go the distance to 3 games, we'll be adding those to the list. So according to my predictions, we're going to have at least 7 games on Thursday's slate as well. So make sure you have your TV ready, your computer, your phone, your iPad. That way you can get at least 4 screens going to watch all of this postseason baseball, because they're going to have to at least double barrel on the time frame. So you're going to need at least 2. So get a TV and a computer, or 2 TVs, hook them up so you guys can check out all the fantastic baseball that is coming your way this week. I know I am excited, although certainly frustrated my fighting Phils, who lose 7 out of 8 down the stretch and miss the playoffs by 1 game. And it's going to cost some people their jobs. But I'll still be watching because I want to talk with you guys, and I'm just a fan of the sport and a fan of the game, and I certainly enjoy playoff baseball. But now jumping into my American League predictions, the Tampa Bay Rays, they face off against the Toronto Blue Jays in the 1-8 matchup here. And this is a bit of a fascinating matchup because the Rays were 6-4 against the Blue Jays this year, of course, playing 10 games in your own division. And they played 5 one-run games out of these 10. So 6-4, half of them being one-run games. But in all 6 of the Tampa Bay victories, the Blue Jays were either tied or ahead in the 7th inning or later in every one of those matchups. So Toronto played Tampa better than anybody did during this regular season. And I mean, even though they lost 6 of 10, in 6 of those games that they lost, every single one of them, they had an opportunity to win and played at least 5 one-run games down the stretch. So a hit here or there, a bounce this way, and this matchup certainly could have swung in Toronto's favor based on the regular season. So these games are going to be highly contested and much closer than the experts think, to quote Lee Corso, according to my calculations here. But the Game 1 matchup we're looking at, Blake Snell takes the ball for Tampa Bay. He'll be opposed by Taijuan Walker. The trade acquisition from Seattle came over mid-year to Toronto. He's been good for them, a 2-1 record, let's see, and a 1.73 ERA. And then in Game 2, you'll have Tyler Glasnow going for Tampa up against Hyun-Jin Ryu, who is in offseason addition in Toronto again, and he'll be very good, or has been very good, during the regular season. And then Game 3, if necessary, you'll get big game Charlie Morton, who's found himself pitching in a lot of tough games and a lot of tough situations, going up against Matt Schumacher, who hasn't been as good for Toronto, and that matchup certainly favors the Tampa Bay Rays. But, I mean, honestly, we'll see how things line up here. I think Snell and Walker is a fantastic matchup. I think these rotations against the opposing offenses, Gurriel Jr. in the month of September hit .368 with 7 bombs for Toronto. Vlad Guerrero Jr. had an up-and-down year, but over the last week, he had 5 extra base hits, so they've been good. And then from Tampa's side, Brandon Lowe has been their most consistent hitter all year. He's followed up his Rookie of the Year, or top 3 Rookie of the Year campaign with an impressive sophomore season. And Nick Anderson has been good for them. The Rays bullpen, they've had 12 different relievers have a save this year. Nick Anderson leads the way with 6. His strikeout to walk numbers are fantastic. So it's going to be a heck of a series. And like I mentioned, a lot of close games. But ultimately, I'm going to go advantage Rays. I'm going to take Tampa to win the series in 3 games. I do think Toronto steals one of the games just based on their energy, their youth, and they truly don't know any better. So I think Tampa wins it in 3 to advance. Next up, we have the 2-seed Oakland Athletics versus the 7-seed Chicago White Sox in what looks to be a fascinating matchup. And one of these teams is going to end a long playoff drought because the Oakland A's last won a playoff round in 2006, and the Chicago White Sox last won a playoff round in 2005. So a 14-year drought in Oakland and a 15-year drought in Chicago, and one of these is ultimately going to come to a close. And looking at the pitching matchups, Chicago has their rotation set the way they would want it. First game, Lucas Giolito. Game 2, Dallas Keuchel. Game 3, Dylan Cease. And they'll be opposed on Oakland's side of things from Sean Manaea in Game 1. Chris Bassett will go in Game 2. And then Mike Fiers will ultimately get the ball, if necessary, in a winner-take-all Game 3. And the Chicago White Sox are a fascinating bunch because they've been playing good baseball all year. But like I mentioned 10 days ago, we're the top seed in the American League. And then the bottom fell out for some of the guys offensively. I mean, Jose Abreu has been good, but Luis Robert, among some others, faded down the stretch, and it'll be fascinating to see if they can kind of flip that switch and turn things on once again when they get back into the playoffs. I don't know if 1 through 9, if they're ever going to be as hot as they were earlier in the year, but I also don't think they're as bad as they've currently played over the course of the last week. And again, if you're the A's, you cannot be happy with lining up against the White Sox, who 35-25 have a much better record than the 6-seed Astros, and you have to go against the likes of Giolito, who has a no-hitter, and Keuchel with an ERA under 2. And because of all of this, ultimately, again, I'm riding my guys. I took them in the National League, the Cincinnati Reds. Well, in the American League, my hot team out of nowhere was the Chicago White Sox. And because of that, I'm taking the White Sox in 2 games. Honestly, I think this is the only one in the American League that doesn't go the distance. I like Giolito against that A's offense and against Manaea in Game 1. Dallas Keuchel has been underrated and extremely effective this year. The reason nobody talks about him is because he doesn't throw mid to high 90s, or he doesn't have a lot of strikeout numbers. He continues to pitch to contact. He continues to get ground balls. And if you play good defense behind him, he can frustrate the heck out of opposing offenses over the course of 7-8 innings. So that's where I think Keuchel and Giolito both win games 1 and 2, and the White Sox advance pretty handily against the Oakland Athletics. I do also think Oakland's record is a bit fluffed due to them being in the American League West. We touched on it, the second-place team Astros making the playoffs with an under 500 record. The rest of the division, of course, worse than that. So I think the A's, if they were put in the AL Central or AL East, may not have as good of a record as they do based on being out west, and therefore being battle-tested. The White Sox are, having run through that Central, I think are ready to put the heat on the A's and ultimately advance very quickly during this wild card round. The next matchup is number 3, the Minnesota Twins versus 6 Houston Astros. Like we touched on it, the second team ever under 500. Can't say it enough. It's fascinating that teams under 500 have made the postseason. I feel like kind of like high school football or basketball to make districts. That's the cutoff. 500 and you're in, and you didn't make it. So we're only going to have 7 teams, and somebody's getting a bye in the first round. But of course, they can't do that. They're going to make the playoff revenue. All about the Benjamins. We all know that. You guys were listening during the pandemic and the union disagreement and all that good stuff that's behind us, but will be in front of us here very, very shortly once again. But for now, in the moment, we're talking playoff baseball. We're talking Houston Astros and Dusty Baker. He's taken his 5th team to the postseason. If I'm not mistaken, he's the first manager ever to take 5 different teams to the playoffs. So for those of you guys stat checking out there, let me know. I may be slightly off with that if there's one other. I don't think there is, though. I think he's the first one ever with 5, and good for Dusty. But Houston comes in limping, losing 3 straight to Texas. They do have Zach Greinke lined up to throw Game 1. He'll be opposed by Kenta Maeda on Minnesota's side of things. Now, Minnesota, their rotation's pretty much set. They got Maeda going Game 1, Jose Barrios lined up for Game 2, and then Michael Pineda lined up to pitch Game 3. And on Houston's side of things, when you get past Zach Greinke, it becomes much, much more blurry. I mean, you have Lance McCullers Jr., who could potentially go, but then you're looking at the kids. Maybe Valdez gets a start. We'll have to wait and see how the first two go, but I'll give the advantage to Zach Greinke. Ultimately, I know Maeda has had a fantastic year in Minnesota. He's up for potential Cy Young honors, finishing second or third in that race there, but I like Greinke. I like the history. I like his, the way he maneuvers the strike zone. I think he'll be able to frustrate those Twins hitters more than most. But then Barrios and Pineda on Minnesota's side of things coming back, I think gives them the true advantage in regards to the series. Houston's offense hasn't been anywhere as good as it's been in the past. Insert trash can buzzer joke here. But ultimately, of course, Jose Altuve, George Springer, Carlos Carrasco, these guys really haven't lived up to the expectations, and the rotation depth behind Zach Greinke, I think, is a bit more limited than it's been in the past for Houston. And ultimately, that's going to be an early exit for them and a disappointing campaign that they just can't wait to finish. I know it's been a tough offseason with everything going on. It's been a long regular season, a bunch of injuries. And in Houston, they do have motivation to make a run here outside of the trash cans and the buzzers, kind of showing, hey, this is us. We are doing this on our own. But I don't know if they make it that far and ultimately have that benefit. So I'm going Minnesota Twins in 3 games. I think Zach Greinke once again takes game 1, but give me Minnesota and that offense overall here moving forward. And then the last matchup is another fascinating matchup. You have the number 4 seed Cleveland Indians. They were once the 7 or 8 seed as they had kind of a mid-season fade. Found themselves here over the past 10 days, made a strong push, and got all the way up to the 4 seed. They'll face off against the 5 seed New York Yankees, and because they're the 5 seed, and now the playoffs being played at a neutral site location, I think this is advantage Cleveland Indians. The Yankees are very good at home. Their home record compared to road record is pretty fascinating. If you look into it in more detail, and a lot of the guys' statistics, home to road, are pretty staggering. There's a differential there. So the Yankees being on the road is advantage Indians. And then, of course, that rotation. Game 1 between the Indians and Yankees is absolutely the marquee pitching matchup across all of Major League Baseball. This will be one of the 4 games on Tuesday, and the best game of the day, so I wouldn't be surprised if they throw this one into primetime Tuesday. Garrett Cole, the offseason signing for the Yankees, going against Shane Bieber, your clear American League Cy Young Award winner. This is the top pitching matchup. I do have Max Fried and Trevor Bauer as the second best pitching matchup in game 1, but you have to go advantage Bieber, even with Garrett Cole. I'm just thinking about it, right? Garrett Cole maybe walks a guy, gives up a home run since he allowed the long ball this year more than any other year in his career. I think he's susceptible to that with Cleveland's offense. Jose Ramirez, Francisco Lindor, Carlos Santana. They have a lot of guys in that lineup who could pop one out of the ballpark, and this is where I think Garrett Cole could get in trouble because he has been, again, susceptible to that this season. So Shane Bieber, the way he's shoved all year, you have to go advantage Cleveland here in game 1. Then in game 2, you have Carlos Carrasco going against Tanaka from the New York side of things. And then in game 3, if it's necessary, you'll have Plesac versus Happ in what would be a determining game 3. And on paper, that's advantage Indians in game 3. So I think the Indians get game 1. I do like Tanaka and the Yankees in game 2. I think that offense, if a win or go home situation presents itself, would give Carlos Carrasco a tough time. And then in the game 3, advantage Plesac over Happ. So ultimately, I like the Indians in 3. And what is a fantastic series. Twins, Astros is a good one. A's, White Sox. These are all great matchups across the American League and across all the playoffs. So I certainly see why that playoff teams were expanded, and now there's 8 teams instead of 4. So if my playoff predictions become correct, that means in the second round or the divisional series, we'll have the Rays versus the Indians, which would be a fantastic series, and then the Twins versus the White Sox, AL Central versus AL Central, and 3 AL Central teams advancing according to my calculations, because I do think that was the best division in baseball this year. So I think those guys, those rotations, those offenses will be able to make damage or create damage here in the playoffs. But that'll wrap things up for today's episode. My goodness, that was a ton of fun. I know it's been a long summer. It's been a long spring. I started talking to you guys here on the podcast, joined the squad in March. We are now in September, heading to October. I wasn't sure if I'd ever be able to talk postseason baseball with you guys. So a ton of fun discussing the last weekend of the regular season, predicting the first round. I am back again Wednesday night, recording for Thursday for you guys. So we'll have games 1 and 2 to talk about in the American League Series and games 1 in the National League Series. But that'll be a lot of fun. Between now and then, my other co-hosts will have episodes continuing every day, so you'll have all your baseball information you need during the postseason to stay up to date on everything going on. But please rate and review the podcast wherever you're listening, Apple, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, whatever it is, as well as follow the GSMC Baseball Podcast and the GSMC Podcast Network on all the social media platforms. But that'll do it for today's episode number 309 here on Monday, September 29th. Hopefully you guys have a great week out there. I can't wait to talk to you again on Thursday. Playoff baseball is here. It's been a lot of fun. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Enjoy the week, everybody.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.